This practice quiz contains over 50 questions that ask you to identify specific structures on either a brain or a brainstem anatomy model. You'll have approximately 10 seconds to answer the questions, and I'll provide you the answers and brief commentary. The list of potential answers as well as timestamps for the questions are in the description below. Feel free to pause the video as needed. Let's get started. So this is the largest, most highly developed part of the brain, comprised of the individual gyri and sulci, that is, the folds or the grooves of the cerebrum, sometimes referred to as the telencephalon. Next, we look more closely at this specific region over here, roughly there. We have one of our major lobes. This one is the temporal lobe, located around the temples, the region of the skull. Lastly, over here we have another structure that sits just below the cerebrum. It's also highly folded. This is the cerebellum, sometimes referred to as the little brain. Now this right here is actually a very large tract of white matter or axons that allow the left and the right hemispheres to communicate together. This is the corpus callosum. Now, if this were an actual brain in a dissection of a specimen, this would be a very thin membrane separating the lateral ventricles of the brain. This is called the septum pellucidum, which essentially means the translucent wall. Now, inside of the cerebellum over here, we see these branching tree-like white matter tracts. They conduct nerve impulses called the Arbor Vitae, also known as the tree of life. This central region of the forebrain is referred to as the Diencephalon, and there are a few different structures that are really important. First, though, let's draw this line right here. That is the hypothalamic sulcus. Therefore, above this line, we have the thalamus, which is the relay center of the brain for most sensory and motor signals. Below that line, we have the hypothalamus. This is the bridge or link between the nervous and the endocrine systems. Now, right back here, we have what's called the pineal gland or pineal body that secretes melatonin to help regulate the sleep-wake cycle. For these first two, if you thought olfactory nerve, you're close. Technically, this right here is the olfactory bulb. It's slightly larger and thicker, and below it down here is the olfactory tract. Now, both of these carry special sensory smell signals, and the olfactory nerves, if they were pictured here, they're not. They would be these tiny little stalks of axons, very short, that are penetrating through the ethmoid bone and going into the nasal cavity. Right here we have the pituitary gland, which releases hormones, and it's connected via this little stalk right here called the infundibulum from the hypothalamus. Now the key word here is general structure. And right here we're looking at a small groove, which is also known as a sulcus. Versus down here we have a fold or a ridge, which is also known as a gyrus. Now the cerebrum is full of both of these, and they're not all named. Over here we have a specific large one that is named. This one is known as the lateral sulcus. Again, we'll see a lot of them throughout the cerebrum. Some of them are named, some of them are not. So this is the longitudinal fissure. Simply put, it's a deep groove that helps separate the left from the right hemispheres of the brain. Now over here we have a very specific structure. Now it's technically this groove, and that groove right there is referred to as the central sulcus. Now it actually continues more medially on a mid-sagittal view, and it's actually vital to be able to see that to help identify it. But essentially this is a very long sulcus that helps separate two different lobes, the parietal lobe from the frontal lobe in the front. Now we can get more specific. In front of this central sulcus, we have the precentral gyrus, which contains the primary motor cortex, and behind it we have the postcentral gyrus, which contains the primary somatosensory cortex. Now the key wording here is region, and specifically we're looking at regions of the cerebrum. So think about the different lobes. First, let's identify that central sulcus again. Okay, so in front we have the frontal lobe, and then behind that we have the parietal lobe. Now we can further subdivide this by looking for our lateral sulcus, also known as lateral fissure because it is very deep, and we can draw a bit of an imaginary line continuing backwards. Next, we want to identify the parietal occipital sulcus, and it's really not apparent on this view, but it's roughly from down here, and it creates an imaginary line. So then from there, we know that this must be the temporal lobe, and back here is the occipital lobe. Lastly, pay attention to the wording right here. We're asking for the structure of the outer surface. Well, we already know that this is the cerebellum, so this is technically the cerebellar cortex. So paying attention to the color, earlier we identified this as the corpus callosum, which was a tracts of axons that allow both cerebral hemispheres to communicate. Well, we have this one in front and this one in back right here, and they also have the same similar color. These are also bundles of axons. In the front, we have the anterior commissure, and in the back, we have the posterior commissure. Lastly, right here in the middle, we already identified this as the region of the Diencephalon. Specifically, we had the thalamus right here, and this right here is the interthalamic adhesion, so it allows both halves of the thalamus to adhere together in the middle. So here we have opened up and separated the lateral fissure or lateral sulcus here, and you can see we've actually cut through in the model. You can see some areas of white matter versus gray matter. But inside of that fissure right here, we have some more cortex. This is the fifth lobe, also known as the insula or the insular cortex. Over here on this image right here, we've removed the rest of the cerebrum, we've left the insula, and then down below it we have the brainstem. This we've already identified as the pituitary gland, and this stalk between it is our infundibulum. It connects the nervous system to the endocrine system. This roughly C-shaped structure is referred to as the fornix, and it contains nerve fibers for the hippocampus, so it plays a vital role in the limbic system and plays a role in memory formation and retention. Over here we have 4 of these bumps on the left and the right side. The upper ones are referred to as the superior colliculus. There's a left one and a right one. And the ones below it are referred to as the inferior colliculus, again, the left and the right inferior colliculus. The superior colliculus processes visual input, while the inferior colliculus processes auditory input, and they both initiate a reflex. Together, all 4 of these can be referred to as the corpora quadrigemina. So for the remaining questions, they're going to be on the brainstem model, which basically comes from this region of our brain model. The brainstem model, we have 3 different regions. We have the midbrain, the pons, and then down here, this question is the medulla, also known as the medulla oblongata. These other arrows are pointing to different cranial nerves. Over here, this one is going to be our largest cranial nerve. That one is the trigeminal nerve, cranial nerve number 5. Now it's important to note these cranial nerves are bilaterally symmetrical between the left and the right sides. So we'll see them on both sides. With the trigeminal nerve, you can also see that there's this small motor branch with the majority of it being sensory. That might help you out. Then we have the facial nerve, cranial nerve number 7. This one comes between the pons and the medulla, or emerges, and it's between the 6th and the 8th cranial nerve. So we got 6, 7, 8. Cranial nerve number 7, the facial nerve. Here we have another fairly large cranial nerve. This one is referred to as the optic nerve, cranial nerve number 2. It carries special sense of sight. Note that some of those fibers will cross over in this region and some of them stay on the same side. The portion that radiates backwards right here is referred to as the optic tract. So we have optic nerve versus optic tract. Now moving down here into the region between the midbrain and the pons, we have this junction line right here. And between that, we have two nerves that originate. One's more medially, one more laterally. The more medial one is referred to as the oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve number 3. Moving down in the region of the medulla oblongata and the spinal cord, we have a branch that comes up from the spinal cord. This one is referred to as the cranial nerve number 11, the accessory nerve. Now it's named that because accessory is not coming directly from the brain stem. It's an accessory as in it's coming from the spinal root down here. Now note that there are some fibers that come from the cranial root right here, and it can be debated whether or not this is actually part of the accessory nerve or not, but most definitely if you see it being pointed to down here, this is the accessory nerve. Up here, this is part of the vagus nerve, and they do junction together. But just be careful. If it's pointing down here, think accessory nerve, cranial nerve 11. So between the midbrain and the pons, we have two cranial nerves emerge here. The more medially one is cranial nerve number 3. More laterally is cranial nerve number 4, the trochlear nerve. Now note, it technically doesn't emerge more laterally, it just appears to from the anterior surface. If we flip this over on the posterior surface, we can see that cranial nerve crossing over, decussating, and traveling posteriorly or laterally here. This is the only cranial nerve to emerge on the posterior aspect of the brainstem. Here we have the vestibulocochlear nerve between the pons and the medulla, if you just count, cranial nerve 6, 7, 8. Vestibulocochlear, special sensory, vestibular between balance, cochlear, hearing. Now in the medulla oblongata, we have this large bundle right here containing motor fibers that are descending going downward. This is a pyramid. We have one on the left and the right side. You can see there's some crossing over right here or decussation going over between the pyramids. So these two structures can be referred to as the cerebral peduncles, both left and right. But if you want to be more specific, technically they're the cerebral crus, the more anterior portion, whereas the peduncles contain some structures behind them. Moving on downward, we have this pontomedullary junction line between the pons and the medulla, and we're looking at cranial nerves. So we go cranial nerve from medially 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that one back here, this is cranial nerve number 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay. That means over here, if we go most medially on the pontomedullary junction line, we have cranial nerve 6, the abducens nerve. Lastly, we have another cranial nerve structure right here. This one emerges just laterally to the pyramids. This is cranial nerve 12, the hypoglossal nerve. Okay, we have another cranial nerve here. If we go between the pons and the medulla, the pontomedullary junction line, we count our cranial nerves from medially to laterally, 6, 7, 8, and then we go inferiorly, 9, 10, 11, and then 12. This is our 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve. Now we've already identified this as a pyramid, and right next to it was the 12th cranial nerve. Now there's this enlargement right here that's shaped like an oval. It's considered the olive or the medullary olive. They're paired. We have one on each side, left and right. Going back up to the region of the midbrain, we have a pair of structures right here. These are the mammillary bodies, or just body for singular, and they assist with memory consolidation. Now we've already identified this structure as the optic nerve, and then radiating backwards is the optic tract. Well, between those we have this X-like structure right here called the optic chiasm. It's where some of the fibers will cross over to the opposite side. We can see it over here in the sagittal view as well right there. Now these last three are for completeness of the quiz, but it's asking for the specific region, and we've already mentioned these a few different times. But for completion, roughly from here to here, we have the region of the midbrain. And you can also see it on this view over here on the left, a bit easier to see, but it is a bit more difficult to see on the sagittal view. Next, we have this region here, the region of the pons. And again, we can see it over here on the left a little bit clearer. And then lastly, we have this region, the very base or the bottom of the brainstem. And you can't really see exactly where it ends on the bottom because it transitions into the spinal cord. But this region right here is the region of the medulla, or the medulla oblongata. Again, easier to see over here on the left. So just pay attention when you're taking these quizzes to the verbiage. Now this last set of questions here is asking for the specific spaces, and these spaces exist within the brain for production of CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, and circulation. There are better models for identifying this, but it's here for completion. So at the very top we have what are referred to as the lateral ventricles, both left and right. We can see a bit of them right here as well. Moving downward, we have the region of the third ventricle right around the thalamus. Going downward, we have the region of the fourth ventricle. And then for completion, we also can see right here, there is a cerebral aqueduct that allows CSF to flow from the third to the fourth ventricle. So that'll conclude our video here on the brainstem and the brain quiz. I do currently have a video out and a demonstration of the brainstem, and that video is linked in the description below.